Hello again, folks. We left off last lesson exactly in this position. We literally typed one character and the bell went, so we left it there. Of course, because we've typed that character, PHP is throwing a syntax error. It doesn't have any idea what's going on here because we need to fill out the rest of this line. Now, before we start, the @ symbol will suppress any errors from the line of code I'm about to write. Now, why do we want to suppress errors? Because if an error goes to screen, it gives somebody with less than honourable intentions an insight into how our server's set up. They may determine that it's Apache running as a web server, they may determine it's a MySQL backend, and that gives them a whole bunch of attack vectors into our server. And we want to avoid that, so the @ suppressing of errors is a good idea. If your server ever has an error, you want it to simply show a blank page, which is what PHP does most of the time, or you want to get an internal server error, an error 500 from HTML. More likely you're going to get a blank page from PHP. Now I can show you ways to debug those sorts of errors using the command line, etc. We'll look at that when we're together again. The intention of this video is to connect our web page, which is a PHP enabled web page. Remember, we renamed it .php, giving us the opportunity to put server-side code in. Now this code always acts on the server, never on the browser. If I write JavaScript, that will work in the browser, so it comes across as just plain script, and the browser interprets that for us, which is really handy for interactivity, etc., but doesn't enable us easily to connect to things like SQL databases, etc. That needs to happen on the server before the page is sent to your browser, and so that's what we're doing right here. Now, just a reminder, we put in localhost as our database host, DB host. The DB user, I had to do this lordstech_dman because I'm doing this on my web hosting server. I gave it this password, let me in 1234, and the database that we want to connect to is address book. So what we're going to do now is make the connection to the database. Once we've made this connection at the top of this page, we can use it multiple times throughout the page. Now we're actually going to use it 3 times. We're going to use it right here at the top to collect the information from this form and put that into our database. We're also going to write here at the top code that will help us delete people from our database. We're going to fix this up. We'll make this a form instead of just a plain button. And then finally, we actually want these contact panels not to be hard-coded as they are right here, but we want these contact panels to come up from data in our database. So that's 3 times we're going to be connecting to our database with 3 different queries on our database. That's what we call the command we send to a database server to either get or update or delete or insert data. So we're going to go through the 3 basic things: delete, insert, and selecting. So let's head on in. Okay, so when we connect to the database at the top, by the way, in the bad old days, we used to have to disconnect every page. Otherwise, we'd waste memory on our web server, and eventually our web server would crash with lots and lots of users connecting to databases. So we used to have to put a MySQL close at the bottom of the page. We don't have to do that anymore. MySQL is smart enough not to keep those connections open. So once the connection is not being used anymore, MySQL tidies up after us, which is kind of handy. But I do remember right down at the bottom of the page having to put in a MySQL close before we got out of the page. All right, we're going to open up our connection with the credentials that we've typed in here. And I think I mentioned the other day that we put those at the top because if I need to change something like a password, I just change it here at the top. I don't have to go searching through my code to find where I've set that password. What I actually do is this block of code that we're about to finish off here, I would put that into an external file and include that at the top of every page where I need to connect to a database. That way I'm literally changing the password in one place, in one file, my whole website. Okay, enough talk, let's get into this. So what we want to do is make a connection. We're going to use a connector that has been written for PHP called MySQL. And I think we've done this before, but just as a reminder, it's the newer version. When I say newer, it's probably been about 15 years since this came out. But when I started doing all this, the connector was called MySQL connector, which makes sense. Then they brought out the improved version, and that's the one we use today. So MySQL I_connect will make a connection to our database. But inside that, we need to give it all of the details above. So we need to tell it the database host. Oops, helps if you spell it right. DB, there it is. When you start typing, you'll notice that it tells you, oh, these are the variables you've already defined. So I can just click on that. So you want the DB host, you want the DB user, the DB password, and finally the DB itself, the database. You give it those 4 pieces of information. We have used our username and password to connect to the server on the local host, and we've already set the database to be addressable. Now, before we do any of that, we actually need to store this connection in a variable. So I'm going to go back to the start of the line, and I'm going to say DB. A lot of people do con, but I generally just go, my database is called this. Now there are times when you want to work with more than one database, so you can make more than one connection, and then it's a good idea to call them different names. But where we've only got one database we're connected to, we can simply say DB. From now on, when we refer to the variable DB, that's referring to the connection we've already opened to our SQL database. Okay, I said that we're going to look at 3 different queries into our database. The first one is going to be sending the information to the database. The second one is going to be collecting information from the database, and the last one's going to be delete. So let's deal with the first one, sending information to the database. We're going to do that right here at the top of the page, and what we're going to do is we're going to go down to the form. Action isn't necessary because the default action of a form is to send the information back to this same page, which is actually what we want. But what we want to do is set up the method to be a post method. Now, it doesn't matter whether you do that in uppercase or lowercase. So, I mean, technically the literature all tells you to do it uppercase, but in HTML it's not too concerned about that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose one of the variables here, name or address or suburb, that we've defined here in our inputs. And it might be just easiest to go for name. And we're going to say if that name's been sent, then this is clearly submitting the form. So I'm going to go back to the top, and after I make the connection, I'm going to give myself comment just to let me know when it's happening. Add contact to database. Now I want to find out if a name has been sent through. So what I'm going to say is if $_post name. Now $_post is what we call a global variable, and it's set whenever something has been posted to this page. And we've basically said if this thing exists, we're going to do something with it. Now we chose name because it's inside the form. What a lot of people do is they give a name to the, and this might not be bad for later on, give a name to the button that submits the form. We're going to work all that out later. But I like to choose a piece of data inside the form. Then I'm going to go open curly brackets because we've got a few things to do. First thing I like to do is set up a query in a query string. So I call it $query. Don't forget, variable names are unimportant. And I'm going to say insert into addresses values. Bracket, bracket. Alright, we need to collect the values that we're going to insert. So up here, and I'm going to store those in local variables because they're just easier to deal with. Okay, so I'm going to say $name equals $_post name. I'm going to copy that because I'm lazy. I'm going to go for address, suburb, postcode, phone, email. So just have to change this. Now in VS Code, if you click on name and you press Control D or Command D on a Mac, then you press it a second time, see how it's highlighted the two adjacent names? If I start typing address, it'll change both those. Of course, if I type it correctly, that would be very handy. I'm going to click on this name and Control D or Command D, and type suburb. Click this guy, Command D, address, suburb, postcode. I think I called that P code from memory. We'll check that in a moment. This guy, Command D, phone I think was next. And this guy, Command D, email. Alright, so what we've done is taken them from this global variable called post. We could have used that, but it's really clumsy. We've put them into simple local variables that we can now use inside these brackets here very easily. When I'm with you again, I might demonstrate why we don't just use the posts directly in here while we copy them into a local variable first. But believe me, it is very, very clumsy. Alright, we're ready to write the rest of this code, but what we need to do is go back and check with our database, make sure we're putting things in the right order. So I'm just going to save this, and then I'm going to go open my database connection. So here I am in PHP MyAdmin again, and I'm just wanting to check the order that I put these in, because I have in the back of my mind that I have email and phone round the other way in my database. Now it doesn't matter whatsoever, we just have to make sure that we get it right when we're trying to insert data in the database. So to do that in PHP MyAdmin, of course, I can open up, I can open up my address book, and I have my table called addresses there. So if I click on that, it'll tell me the order of my different columns there. And you can see that I've got email before phone, whereas I think if I go back over to my code, on the form I have phone before email. Now, like I said, not a big deal, we just have to make sure that we match what's happening here when we do this insert statement, which is what we're about to do. Okay, we've got ID, which is auto incrementing, so we're basically going to just get MySQL to do the default for that. Then we've got name, address, suburb, postcode, email, and phone. So in our code, right at the top where we just started to do our inserts, first thing we need to do is say, you can handle the ID for me, and we do that with the keyword default. Now we're going to put name, address, suburb, blah blah blah, but when we do that we have to include them all in single quotes. So I'm going to go $name, $address, $suburb, oops, accidentally mucked that one up, get that guy in there, $p code. I was going to check how I did that in the form, wasn't I? Now I've got email before phone in the database. Now what PHP does is it's going to grab the name from this global variable post when it gets posted across to us. It's going to store that in a local variable called name. Then down here when it sees $name, it's automatically going to put in the value of what we've posted. And so you can see now that this would flesh out to, John Jones, 12 whatever street, Pipamar, 420, blah blah blah. Let's check this P code while I'm still here and thinking about it. I've got lowercase p, uppercase C. Let's go check that because case is important. lowercase p, uppercase c, so we're good. Okay, I got phone number and email, and we know that they're reversed for the database, so I have reversed those, email and phone number here. Now, to be honest, the way we set the database up, it's all text, so it would happily slap a phone number into the email field, but then when we go and try and use it later on, it's not going to make much sense, is it? Okay, we've set the query up. Now, to issue the query, it's very simply a matter of calling MySQLi underscore query. We have to tell it the connection. Now, the connection I stored in the variable $db, so I say $db, and then the query. Now, again, I like to do this as a string because there's several reasons. First of all, it's very clear where it is. I could actually just put the quote insert into etc. here instead of this variable. But the other thing it gives me the opportunity of doing is checking whether this has been formed properly. I could actually throw in a little bit of a debug. I could echo $query here and have come up on my screen exactly what the query is, as a bit of a first line of defense debug. Now, that's not desperately important at this point in time, so I'm not going to do that. That'll just mess up our page. We'll know whether it works when we get some data into the database. Now, normally with this MySQL query, we would store a result, something like this. And again, it can be result, it can be Harry, it doesn't matter what the name is. And we can test that result to make sure it's been inserted. But again, I find that a little too trivial for these smaller examples. If you were doing a big production database where it's lots of important information, you might certainly do that sort of thing. A lot more error checking. But just issuing the command without storing the result is perfectly fine for the purposes of this demonstration. So now we've actually got this ready to insert. So we have this all set up now. It's ready to go. Because the button that we have at the bottom there is inside this form, that it will automatically submit this form. Now, we might want to do some checks and balances on the form. We'll show you that a little later when we're together again. But let's just worry about getting data into here. So I'm going to save this, and we're going to go browse to it. Heading over to my browser, I've got a blank page here that I can type in my address to. I want to be right next to where I'm looking at my database so that I can see whether stuff gets put into my table. Now, of course, you are localhost/address book. Mine's a little more complex. Lords Tech Online. In fact, I've cheated. I've already put a little on my main page. I've already put a little click on that. But if you go to Lords Tech Online, you'll see that main page, and you can have a look at some of the demos that I've done for other classes. So here we go. We're going to go Betty Boop. Their address is going to be 13 Mockingbird Lane. If anybody can tell me what that reference is, that would be great. Let's go Ormo, which I think is 4208. Somebody can correct me. We'll go for 0423 space 123 space 345. That's their phone number. And their email is going to be Betty at hotmail.com, and I'm going to click on add contact. And when I do, this form will clear out because the whole page reloads. Now, it might happen very quickly, so you may not see it. You might. And nothing will happen over here because we haven't written that part yet, but in theory we should be able to add a contact at this point. Now, if I go back to my database and I click on browse again to refresh the page, I now have Betty Boop 13 Mockingbird Lane. So that's all the data inside, just like we wanted. Okay, back to our code. I might just close this side panel just so that you can see the code a little bit clearer. Back to our code. So we've done one thing. We've actually inserted data into our database, so that's all good. Deleting's quite easy too, but we'll worry about that later. We're going to go down now to the section where we put in these contact panels. Now, we wrote one, hard-coded it in. We're now going to put the PHP in to change the data in this one, and we're going to loop around multiple times. so that if we got 2, 3, 4 pieces of data in there, they'll all show up. Now we did this, we copied and pasted that a few times, so we're going to delete these extra contact panels. Now it's very important that you delete the contact panels like that. So that's the first one. Don't go doing something silly like deleting the section tag at the bottom, or only deleting from the end of the button. Make sure it's div to div. So I'm going to delete that one, keep going, keep sliding, there we go, keep going, keep going. Whoop, there's the first one, so I don't want to delete that one. So now I should have just one contact panel, not a bad idea. If we press enter, so we get it sort of on its own in the middle here, we don't have to worry about anything else. Before we start printing these contact panels up, what we need to do is get the data from our database. That way we know how many times we've got to put these contact panels up. To do that, anywhere in our code, we can break into PHP code by getting at that tag block. Now, we're going to go to our database and we're going to select star from addresses. The star simply means select everything, get everything out of the address table. We wanted that all in a result variable that we can work through. Now, I could put in order by name, but since we're putting first name and last name together, it's going to order by people's first name, which is probably not very important. But you might find useful, so we might leave that there. Obviously, if you separated last name and first name, you could do something a little bit more meaningful with that, but that's not a huge issue. Now, of course, we're connected to the database at the top, so we can simply go, we want a result out of this, so we can work through the result. We're going to issue the command, so it's MySQL query again. You can see that VS Code is trying to hint as to what I might mean, and I should probably use that more often. And the query is going to be done on is going to be issued to our database connection, just like before. At that point in time, we now have a table in result. That table has all the columns that are in our database, all those columns, and all of the rows that are in our database. Now, to work through them, we can put them into a simple while loop. Now, the while part is going to be interesting. We're going to say while each row is taken from the result. So what this will do is it'll fetch each row one by one out of result and put it into the variable row, and we can use this row array to actually print up the information that we're after. Now, this contact panel that we got here, we actually want to be inside this loop. So I'm going to get rid of the last curly brace. I'm going to come down after this div. I'm going to break into PHP again and then break back out of it. And I'm going to put just that curly brace there. So you can see by the highlighting, I've now put this contact panel inside the loop we've created with while. I've got John Jones and Betty Boop in there, so that's going to go through this twice. Now I broke out of PHP because I want to put this up as plain old HTML again. But the beauty is, here where I've got the words John Jones, I don't know why I've got those spaces in front. What I can do is break back into PHP, just print the name, and then break back out of PHP. To do that, I'm going to get rid of John Jones. I'm going to type in what's called a short echo. Now you can see that it's kind of like a PHP tag. Short tags used to be acceptable in PHP. They're considered not acceptable anymore, but this short echo is still quite good. Now the echo is the less than symbol question mark equals, and then I can simply put in a variable name. Now I want to show from row the name that I've just collected out. So that first time through will be John Jones, second time through will be Betty Boop. Now that's all I need to do. I don't need a semicolon at the end of that. I can simply print the value of row name. So don't forget, row is getting the name from the result that we get back from our query. So we can copy and paste this into here, into here. Etc., etc., etc. Then all we need to do is change name to address, name to suburb, name to P code, phone, and I save that. Let's go test it. So I'm going to jump across to my browser and hit address book. So we've still got all of our hard-coded John Joneses. If I do a refresh on this page, and it's going to send the information again, so I won't do that. What I will do is I will simply go here and press enter. I've got Betty Boop and I've got John Jones. Don't forget they're in order of their first names. So all of that information now has been placed into these panels. If I go and add a new person, James, I don't know, Harrison, 123 Old Pacific Highway, from, I don't know, Nerang. I have no idea what Nerang's postcode is, but we'll make it up. And his number is 0755675678. And his email is, what's his name? jharry@outlook.com. When I add him, of course, this is still working, so that's going to add him to my database. Because the page refreshes, it's going to automatically add him over on the right hand side. And then James Harrison comes in the middle. There's the second part, all complete. Okay, so we have all of these contact panels now showing for each of the people in our database, and we want to be able to delete contacts. Now, initially I was going to change this button into a little form that sent the ID through, and when we collected the ID we could figure out that we need to do a delete. But I think we'll do it using JavaScript, because I just feel like we need to do something a little tricky using JavaScript. And it's really very easy with JavaScript to reload the current page. There are a lot of JavaScript methods that do that. However, what we're going to do is we're going to assign it, and we're going to send along the ID of the person we want to delete. Then PHP will pick that up at the top of the page and do the delete. Okay, to do that, to issue JavaScript, we can say onClick, which is an event for the button, equals, and then double quotes. To change the location of a website using a JavaScript command, we grab the location from the document object model, the DOM, and we reassign it to a new page. Now, that new page in our case is going to be the current index, which is short. The code I just typed is shorthand for the exact same page that we're currently on, or the exact same index page we're currently on. And we're going to send it a variable. We're going to say and del equals some value. Now that value is the ID of the current row we're in. So we can use this shorthand that we've got here. Doesn't matter which one. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to place that in line here. Now don't panic that the colouring isn't right. We have completely confused VS Code at this point, because we're in HTML doing a bit of JavaScript, and inside the JavaScript we're running PHP. Now the good news is this will all work out in the end. We don't want the phone number though, we want the ID. Alright, I have added into my, I'll save that, I've added into my website a little fake person here. Now the theory is, of course I have to reload this, and you'll notice that I've already been playing with this as a bit of a test. I want to get rid of that fake person. I hit the delete, and what I'm expecting to see is del equals 4, which is the ID number of that thing. Now of course I haven't deleted it yet because I haven't written the PHP, but at least we know that that variable is being passed. If I click on James, he's number 3. If I click on Betty, she's number 2. And then of course John Jones is number 1. But I'm passing across this fake person, del equals 4, which is all good. So now what I need to do is jump back to code, go to the top. Now I'm already checking if the contact person, the contact form has been submitted here. So underneath that, I'm going to do a second if, and I'm going to go $_get del. Now the reason that I use get is that post is posted in the background. You never see what's posted to a page. But if you put variables here after the question mark, and by the way, if I wanted to do more variables, I use an ampersand and name equals whatever, but that's not appropriate here. So if you can do more than one variable at a time. But if you put them here in the address line, that's called a get. And so they are stored in PHP in the get global variable. Now the name of that variable was del for delete. And so what I can do in here is I can simply create a query that says delete from addresses where ID equals. Now, at that point, I want to use this global variable. I could do what I did up here and store it in a local variable, but that's not really important here because we've only got one to deal with, whereas up here we had 6. Okay, and it was really clumsy to put in, post variables into here. So what I can do is add to the end of this string, and in PHP we can concatenate or put together strings by putting a full stop. And I can simply say whatever the value of del is. Now again, I probably should be storing, there it is there, I probably should be storing the value of this query in a variable and checking it and putting up error messages, etc. for my users. But in a very simple single page application like we've got here, that's all unnecessary. So all I have to do is go to my database and issue the query. And we're done. Save that, come back over here. I'm going to get rid of that because that will automatically activate it. Browse to that raw. I've already got this person down here I want to delete, so when I hit the delete button, I should see del equals 4 and they've gone. So a quick recap. We have 3 things to do in our database. So we connect to the database. If a form has been posted and we're detecting that if the name has been posted across, then we're going to insert the details of what was in that form to our database. If in the address line on the web browser we get a del equals, we're going to delete what that del equals from the database, because that's the ID of the person when we issue that query. And then the third thing we're doing is down here, we are getting everything from our addresses. We're running through a loop with that information, and each time we're writing up a contact panel and we're putting in the individual pieces of information. And then finally we're using a little bit of clever JavaScript there and PHP embedded in it to actually delete each person. And that is our working tutorial, the address book.